Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Everyday English Channel with Tom and Kate. We're really happy to have you with us today. Before we start, if you enjoy these calm and practical English conversations, you can subscribe to the channel or share this episode with someone who is learning English. It really helps us, and we really appreciate it. So today we're going to talk about something very common for many people: work. More specifically, how people actually speak in English at work in everyday situations. Not formal emails or presentations, but real conversations between colleagues during the day. In my case, I like to start the day in a structured way. When I arrive, I greet people and quickly try to understand what needs attention. I might say something like, "Good morning, how are you?" and then follow with, "What's on the plan today?" or "Do we have anything urgent?" It helps me organize my day from the beginning and gives me a clear direction.
My mornings look quite different. I arrive, say hello, and then I slowly get into my work without really planning everything in advance. My conversations are more casual. I might say, "Morning, how's it going?" or "Anything important today?" I don't try to structure the whole day immediately. I just start working and adjust as things come. What's interesting is that even with these different approaches, the language stays very simple. People don't use long or complicated sentences. They ask short questions and give short answers, and that's enough to keep the conversation moving.
Yes, and that becomes very clear when people talk about their tasks. At work, this happens constantly. Someone asks what you're working on, and the answer is usually very direct. You might say, "I'm working on a report," or "I'm finishing a project," or "I'm preparing something for later." You don't need to explain every detail. A simple sentence is enough to give a clear idea of what you're doing. In my case, I often describe my day in a structured way. I might say, "I have a meeting this morning, then I'm working on the budget this afternoon." It helps people understand my priorities and how my day is organized.
I usually keep it more focused on the present moment. I say things like, "I'm just finishing something," or "I'm catching up on emails." I don't always plan the whole day, so I just describe what I'm doing right now. And I think many people recognize themselves in that. Not everyone works with a clear schedule, but communication still works because the language is simple and direct.
Another situation that happens all the time at work is asking for help. And again, the language is very simple. You can say, "Can you help me with this?" or "Can you take a look at this?" These are very natural and polite ways to ask for support. I personally use "Can you check this?" quite often because it's short and efficient.
Yes, and when someone asks you for help, the response is usually just as simple. You don't need long explanations. You can say, "Sure, no problem," or "I'll take a look." And if you're busy, you can say, "I'm a bit busy right now. Can I come back to you later?" That's something I say quite often. It's honest but still polite, and it keeps the interaction smooth.
Another very common part of work conversations is talking about deadlines and priorities. You hear things like, "This needs to be done today," or "This is urgent," or "We can do this later." These sentences are simple, but they carry a lot of meaning, and everyone understands immediately what needs to happen.
And something I've noticed is that people don't always speak in full sentences, especially in quick conversations. You might just hear "all good," "done," or "still working on it." These short responses are extremely common, and they sound completely natural in a work environment.
And that's probably one of the most important things to understand. Workplace English is not about speaking perfectly all the time. It's about being clear, efficient, and natural in your communication.
Another situation that comes up very often at work is meetings. And what's interesting is that people often expect meetings to be very formal, but in reality, the language used is still quite simple. When a meeting starts, nobody uses complicated sentences. You usually hear things like, "Shall we start?" or "Let's begin." Then someone quickly explains the objective by saying something like, "Today we need to review this project," or "We're here to talk about the next steps." In my case, I like meetings to be clear and structured from the beginning. I try to understand the objective as quickly as possible, and I often confirm it out loud. I might say something like, "So, the goal is to finish this by the end of the week, right?" That kind of sentence helps make sure everyone is aligned before moving forward.
I approach meetings in a more flexible way. I don't always try to structure everything immediately. I usually listen first, understand the general direction, and then react when something is relevant for me. When I speak, I keep it simple and natural. I might say, "I think this works," or "I'm not sure about this part," or "maybe we can try something different." I don't try to build perfect sentences. I just react to what I hear and add my point of view.
And that's actually how most people speak in meetings. They don't prepare complex sentences. They listen, react, and adapt as the discussion evolves. One very common moment is when people agree with an idea. And again, the language stays simple. You hear things like, "Yes, that makes sense," or "I agree," or "That sounds good." These expressions are used constantly because they are clear and efficient. At the same time, people often want to agree and add something. In that case, they extend their answer slightly. They say, "Yes, I agree, but maybe we can also," or "That works, but we might need to check." This allows them to stay positive while still contributing something new.
I use that kind of structure quite a lot. It feels natural because you don't interrupt the flow of the meeting. You show that you understand, and then you add your idea. And when it comes to disagreement, the tone becomes very important. People don't usually say, "No, that's wrong." They soften their message. I would say something like, "I'm not sure this will work," or "I see your point, but maybe we could try something else." It keeps the conversation respectful and avoids tension, which is very important in a work environment.
Another important part of meetings is when something is not clear. This happens all the time, and the way people handle it is very simple. They don't stay silent. They ask directly using short questions like, "Can you explain that again?" Or, "What do you mean exactly?" Or, "Can you give an example?" These questions are extremely common, and they help keep the discussion clear for everyone.
Yes, and I think that's something learners often hesitate to do. But in reality, asking for clarification is part of normal communication. Nobody understands everything immediately, even in their own language. Another situation that happens very often is giving updates during the meeting. People explain where they are with their work, but they don't give long explanations. They say things like, "It's almost done," or "I'm still working on it," or "We finished this part." These updates are short, but they give enough information for everyone to understand the situation. Sometimes people add a small detail to make it clearer. They might say, "It's almost done, but I still need to check a few things," or "We finished this part, so now we can move to the next step." It keeps the update simple, but slightly more complete.
And then, at the end of the meeting, things become simple again. People don't try to make a long conclusion. They just close the discussion clearly. You hear things like, "All right, I think that's it," or "We're good for today," or "Let's stop here." And sometimes someone adds a short summary like, "So we finish this by Friday, and we check again next week." That kind of summary helps everyone leave with the same understanding, without needing a long explanation.
And when you look at all these situations together, something becomes very clear. Meetings are not about perfect English. They are about understanding what is happening, reacting at the right moment, and contributing in a simple way.
Yes, and once you realize that, speaking in meetings becomes much easier. You stop trying to build perfect sentences and you focus on being clear and natural.
Another part of work that people often underestimate is informal conversation. Not meetings, not tasks, just the small interactions that happen during the day. And these moments are actually very important because they happen naturally and help build relationships between colleagues. In my case, I don't spend a lot of time on small talk, but it still happens regularly. When I see someone during the day, I might say something like, "How's your day going?" or "Is everything under control?" These questions are simple, but they open the conversation without taking too much time. What I find interesting is that people don't expect long answers in these situations. Someone might say, "It's been busy," or "Not too bad," or "Quite a long day." That's enough to create a connection without going into detail.
I probably spend more time in those informal conversations. I like taking short breaks and talking to people, especially when the day feels a bit heavy. My way of speaking is very natural. I might say, "It's been a long morning," or "I'm a bit tired today," or "There's a lot going on this week." These sentences are very simple, but they express how I feel, and that's usually what people share in these moments. It's not about explaining everything, it's about giving a general feeling of the day.
Yes, and that's something you hear very often at work. People describe their day with simple adjectives instead of detailed explanations. You hear things like, "It's busy," "It's calm," "It's a bit stressful," or "It's quite relaxed." These words are enough to give a clear idea of the situation, and then the conversation continues naturally. The other person might react by saying they feel the same, or that their day is different. It creates a very easy flow.
Another common topic in these informal conversations is workload. People often want to express that they have a lot to do, but again, they don't go into detail. They say things like, "I have a lot on my plate," or "I'm quite busy today," or "I'm trying to finish a few things." These expressions are very natural and used in many workplaces. In my case, I use them quite often, especially when I want to explain why I can't do something immediately. Instead of giving a long explanation, I just say, "I'm a bit busy right now. Can I come back to you later?" It's simple and clear.
That's a very realistic situation, and it shows how people manage their time through communication. Another moment that happens often is when people talk about what they have already completed. They might say, "I finished that earlier," or "I already sent the email," or "I took care of it." These short updates are very common and help keep everyone informed without needing a long explanation. At the same time, when something is not finished, people use equally simple language. They say, "I'm still working on it," or "I haven't finished yet," or "I'll do it later." These sentences are direct and easy to understand.
Another part of the day that creates a lot of small conversations is taking breaks. People often mention what they are about to do in a very simple way. They say, "I'm going for a coffee," or "I need a quick break," or "I'll be back in a few minutes." These sentences are short, but they are useful because they help others understand where you are and what you are doing. It's not about the activity itself, it's about keeping communication clear.
And something similar happens when things don't go as planned. This is very common at work, but people don't explain everything in detail. They keep it simple and focus on the situation and the action. You might hear, "There's a small issue," or "Something went wrong," or "I need to fix this." And very often, that is immediately followed by a short action like, "I'll take a look," or "I'll sort it out," or "I'll handle it." This combination is very typical. You explain the problem briefly, and then you explain what you are going to do.
And I think that really shows how workplace communication works. It's not about long explanations or perfect sentences. It's about being clear, efficient, and focused on what matters. People say just enough to explain the situation and what they plan to do next. That's what keeps everything moving.
Yes, and when you look at all these situations together, you see the same pattern again and again. Simple sentences, clear ideas, and a natural flow of conversation.
And that's what makes workplace English much easier than people expect. You don't need complex grammar, you just need to communicate in a clear and practical way.
When I think about a full workday, what strikes me is how easy it is to describe it using very simple English. You don't need complex sentences or long explanations. You just connect a few key moments. In my case, I would describe my day in a structured way. I arrive in the morning, I check what needs to be done, and I organize my priorities. Then I move through the day, step by step. I might have a meeting, work on a specific task, check progress, and make sure everything is moving forward. If someone asks me about my day, I don't give a detailed report. I keep it simple. I might say, "It's been a productive day. I had a meeting this morning, then I worked on a few things this afternoon." That's enough to give a clear and complete picture without going into detail.
My version sounds different, but the structure is actually very similar. I don't organize everything in advance, so I describe my day more based on how it felt rather than what I planned. I might say, "It's been a busy day. I spent most of the time catching up on emails and dealing with a few things." Sometimes I add a feeling, like, "It was a bit stressful," or "It went quite fast." That's usually enough for the other person to understand how my day went. What I find interesting is that I don't feel the need to explain everything. I just give a general idea, and if the other person wants more details, they ask. That's how conversations naturally develop at work.
Yes, and that's something people often forget. You don't need to explain everything from the beginning. You give a short summary, and then the conversation builds from there. Another thing I notice is how people naturally compare their days. Instead of describing everything, they say things like, "Today was busier than yesterday," or "This week is calmer than last week." These comparisons are simple, but they say a lot. In my case, I might say, "Today was quite efficient," or "This week has been very focused." It helps me summarize my experience quickly.
I do something similar but in a more relaxed way. I might say, "Today was a bit easier," or "This week has been quite intense." I don't think too much about the structure, I just describe how it feels. And I think that's something many people do at work. They don't give facts, they give impressions. That makes the conversation more natural and more human.
Another part of the day that creates a lot of simple communication is what happens toward the end of the day. People don't suddenly start speaking differently. They keep using the same simple language. If I need to explain what comes next, I might say, I still need to finish this, or I'll do that tomorrow, or I'll take care of it later. These sentences are direct and easy to understand.
I use those expressions a lot, especially when I want to close something without going into detail. It helps me explain where I am without starting a long explanation. And when it's time to leave, the language becomes even simpler. I just say, I'm done for today, or I'm heading out, or see you tomorrow. These are very small sentences, but they are part of daily communication.
And when you look at the entire day, it's really just a series of small interactions. You greet people, you talk about tasks, you ask for help, you give updates, you react to situations, and then you close the day. Each of these moments uses simple language. There is no need for complexity.
Yes, and that's probably the most important thing to understand about English at work. It's not about speaking perfectly. It's about being clear, natural, and efficient. You say just enough to communicate your idea, and that's what people respond to.
And once you understand that, everything becomes easier. You stop trying to build perfect sentences, and you focus on what really matters, which is the message.
Before we finish, thank you very much for spending this time with us today.
We hope this conversation helps you feel more comfortable speaking English at work in real-life situations.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to the channel or share it with someone who is learning English. It really helps us grow, and we truly appreciate your support.
Join us in the next episode for another calm and practical English conversation.
Thanks again for listening.
And remember, keep speaking English every day.